The bitter cold of the Wyoming winter sliced through Delilah McKinnon's shawl as she clutched her 6-month-old son closer to her chest, the howling wind drowning out his frightened cries. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving December blizzard had caught her on the 3-mile journey between her modest homestead and the nearest trading post. Now, with visibility reduced to mere inches and the temperature plummeting, her only thought was keeping little Samuel alive. "Just a little farther, my sweet boy," she whispered, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. "Mama's going to get us home." But home seemed impossibly distant as the snow piled higher around her skirts. The familiar landmarks had disappeared under a blanket of white, leaving Delilah disoriented and increasingly desperate. She had been a widow for 3 months now, ever since her husband Thomas had succumbed to pneumonia, leaving her alone with their infant son and a struggling cattle ranch that was more debt than profit. The wind shifted suddenly, throwing a wall of snow against her face with such force that she stumbled backward, losing her footing on the slippery ground. As she fell, Delilah twisted her body to protect Samuel, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her hip and shoulder, but her only concern was for her child. "It's all right, Samuel," she soothed, checking him frantically. His little face was red from the cold, but his eyes were open, staring up at her with complete trust. That trust broke her heart. He had no idea of the danger they were in. Struggling to her feet, Delilah realized with growing terror that she could no longer feel her toes. Her fingers, wrapped around Samuel's bundled form, were stiff and unresponsive. She had to keep moving, had to find shelter, or they would both freeze to death. 20 yards away, though invisible through the driving snow, Owen Flynn squinted from beneath his hat brim as he guided his horse along the edge of his property. The 25-year-old rancher had been checking on his cattle before the storm worsened when he'd spotted what looked like a figure moving through the whiteness. Now, as he urged his mount forward, he wondered if his eyes had been playing tricks on him. "Hello," he called out, his voice immediately swallowed by the howling wind. "Is someone out there?" The answering sound was so faint he almost missed it, a baby's cry, carried briefly on the wind before being silenced again. Owen's heart hammered in his chest. A child, out in this weather. He spurred his horse forward, following the direction of the sound. "Hello," he called again, louder this time. "Where are you?" Delilah had fallen to her knees, her strength finally giving out. The snow was piling around her, creating a white tomb that seemed to promise a peaceful sleep. But Samuel's cries had roused her from the dangerous lethargy that had been settling over her mind. "Someone help us," she whispered, too exhausted to shout. "Please." Through the swirling white, she saw a dark shape approaching a horse and rider, materializing like a ghost in the storm. For a moment, she wondered if her mind was creating visions as death approached, but then the rider dismounted and a man's strong voice cut through the wind. "Madam, are you hurt?" Delilah tried to respond, but her lips were too numb to form words. Instead, she held out her precious bundle, prioritizing her child's safety over her own. Owen reached her side and knelt in the snow, taking in the woman's blue-tinged lips and the small bundle in her arms. "I'm Owen Flynn," he said, already shrugging out of his heavy buffalo coat. "My ranch is just over that rise. Can you stand?" She nodded weakly, clutching her baby to her chest. Owen wrapped his coat around her shoulders and helped her to her feet, noticing how she swayed unsteadily. "The baby," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Please, take Samuel first." Owen hesitated, not wanting to leave her even for a moment, but he could see the determination in her eyes. He gently took the infant, tucking him securely inside his wool shirt against his chest. "I'll come right back for you," he promised, helping her sit with her back against a tree trunk for minimal shelter. "Don't fall asleep. Keep moving your fingers and toes." Owen mounted his horse and galloped toward his ranch house, the baby's small form warm against his chest. The child had stopped crying, which worried him. He urged his horse faster, relief flooding through him as the solid shape of his two-story ranch house emerged from the whiteness. He dismounted in one fluid motion, rushing inside where his housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, looked up from her knitting with alarm. "Mr. Flynn, what on earth? Found a baby in the storm," he explained quickly, handing the bundled child to her. "The mother's still out there. Get this little one warm while I go back for her." Without waiting for a response, Owen grabbed a lantern and rope from beside the door and was back on his horse, fighting his way through the intensifying blizzard. The visibility had deteriorated further, and he feared he would be unable to find the woman again. But his horse, a clever paint named Dusty, seemed to remember the way, picking his path carefully back to where they had found the pair. When Owen reached the tree, his heart sank. The woman was no longer sitting where he'd left her. For a moment, panic gripped him as she wandered off, confused by the cold. But then he spotted a shape on the ground nearby, nearly covered by the rapidly accumulating snow. "Madam," he called, jumping from his horse and rushing to her side. "Madam, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Snow had already partially buried her still form, and her eyes were closed. Owen brushed the snow from her face with gentle hands, noting with relief that small clouds of breath still formed in the freezing air. She was alive, but barely. With careful movements, Owen lifted her into his arms. She was tall for a woman, but slender, and the harsh winter had likely taken away whatever extra weight she might have carried. He placed her across his saddle, then mounted behind her, cradling her body against his chest to share whatever warmth he could. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "Your baby needs you." The journey back to his ranch seemed interminable, but at last the welcoming lights of his home appeared through the curtain of white. Mrs. Holloway must have been watching for them, because the door swung open before he could dismount. "Merciful heavens," the older woman gasped, helping Owen carry the unconscious woman inside. "Is she?" "She's breathing," Owen said, laying her gently on the sofa near the roaring fireplace. "But she's been out in this weather too long." "How's the baby?" "Warming up nicely," Mrs. Holloway replied, gesturing to a basket she'd placed near the fire, lined with blankets. The infant was awake now, his eyes wide as he took in his new surroundings. "He's a strong little fellow." Owen turned his attention back to the woman. Her skin was dangerously cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. He knew from growing up in Wyoming territory that the dangers of freezing went beyond just the cold itself. The body could turn against itself when warming too quickly. "We need to warm her gradually," he told Mrs. Holloway. "Can you heat some water? Not boiling, just warm." As the housekeeper bustled away, Owen gently removed the woman's snow-soaked outer garments, replacing them with dry blankets. Her long auburn hair was damp with melting snow, and he carefully unwound it from its practical bun, spreading it out to dry. Mrs. Holloway returned with warm water, clean rags, and a cup of broth. Together, they bathed the woman's hands and feet in the lukewarm water, slowly bringing circulation back to her extremities. Owen noted with concern the bluish tinge to her fingertips and toes. Frostbite was a real possibility. The baby began to fuss, and Mrs. Holloway lifted him from his makeshift bed, rocking him gently. "Poor little must be hungry," she said. "I can prepare some milk and sugar water, but he'll be wanting his mother soon enough." As if hearing his child's distress, the woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Owen moved closer, speaking gently. "Madam, can you hear me? You're safe now." Her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer sage. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then panic set in. She tried to sit up, her movements frantic despite her weakness. "Samuel, where is my baby?" She gasped, her voice hoarse. "He's right here," Owen assured her, motioning for Mrs. Holloway to bring the child closer. "He's fine. You kept him well protected." The sight of her son seemed to release some of the tension in her body, though she still reached out with trembling hands to touch his cheek, as if needing physical confirmation of his well-being. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Owen with eyes that held both gratitude and lingering fear. "I thought we were going to die out there." "You might have if I hadn't happened by," Owen acknowledged. "I'm Owen Flynn. This is my housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway. You're at my ranch about 3 miles southwest of Laramie." "Delilah," she replied weakly. "Delilah McKinnon. My homestead is north of town, near Willow Creek." Owen exchanged glances with Mrs. Holloway. The McKinnon place was at least 10 miles from where he'd found Delilah. She had been hopelessly lost in the storm. "What were you doing out in weather like this, Mrs. McKinnon?" he asked, offering her the cup of warm broth. Delilah accepted it gratefully, taking a small sip before answering. "I needed supplies from town. I've been running low on essentials since my husband passed. The storm came in faster than I expected." The slight hesitation, the correction from "we" to "I," it told Owen much about her situation. A recent widow, trying to manage alone with a young child. It was an all too common story in the territories, where life was harsh and unforgiving. "You and your son will stay here until the storm passes," Owen said, his tone brooking no argument. "The blizzard's likely to continue through the night, maybe longer." Delilah looked as though she might protest, but a glance at her baby seemed to change her mind. "Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Your kindness. I don't know how I can repay it." "No need for repayment," he replied simply. "Any decent person would have done the same." Mrs. Holloway took charge then, insisting that Delilah needed proper rest. Owen carried her to the guest bedroom on the first floor, careful not to jostle her still cold limbs. The baby was settled in a drawer lined with soft blankets beside the bed, a makeshift crib that would keep him close to his mother. "Call if you need anything," Owen told Delilah as he prepared to leave the room. "Anything at all." She nodded, her eyelids already heavy with exhaustion. "My son and I owe you our lives, Mr. Flynn." "Owen," he corrected gently. "And you don't owe me a thing, Mrs. McKinnon." "Delilah," she murmured as sleep began to claim her. "Just Delilah." The blizzard raged for 3 days, confining them all to the warmth and safety of Owen's ranch house. During that time, Delilah regained her strength gradually, though the tips of 2 fingers on her left hand remained numb, a permanent reminder of how close she had come to death. Owen found himself drawn to the quiet dignity with which Delilah faced her situation. She spoke little of her late husband, but what she did say painted the picture of a marriage that had been more practical than passionate. Thomas McKinnon had been 15 years her senior, a man who had offered her security when her father died, leaving her with few options as a 19-year-old woman in frontier Wyoming. "He was a good man," Delilah told Owen on the second evening as they sat by the fire after supper, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms. "But the ranch was always struggling. The winter of '75 took half our cattle, and this past summer's drought didn't help matters." Owen nodded, understanding all too well the challenges of ranching in Wyoming territory. "It's a hard life for anyone, let alone a woman alone with a child. I've been trying to sell," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "But no one wants a failing ranch, especially not with snow on the ground. I was hoping to hold out until spring, but—" She trailed off, the reality of her precarious situation hanging in the air between them. Owen studied her profile, illuminated by the firelight. At 22, Delilah McKinnon had already endured more hardship than many twice her age. Yet there was a resilience about her that he found captivating, a quiet strength that reminded him of his own mother, who had helped his father build their ranch from nothing, before succumbing to influenza 5 years earlier. "I might know someone interested in buying," he said carefully, not wanting to overstep. "When the weather clears, I could ride over, assess the property." Delilah turned to him, hope and wariness mingling in her expression. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further on your generosity." "It's no imposition," Owen assured her. "Truth is, I've been looking to expand my operation. If your land adjoins Willow Creek, it might be just what I need." It wasn't entirely true Owen's ranch was successful enough without expansion. But something about Delilah's quiet dignity, and the way she cradled her son with such fierce protectiveness, made him want to help her, to offer her a way out of her desperate situation. On the fourth morning, they awoke to find the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape of untouched white. The sun shone brightly, causing the snow to glitter like a field of diamonds. "It's beautiful," Delilah murmured, standing at the window of Owen's study. "Hard to believe something so lovely nearly killed us." Owen came to stand beside her, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender from her freshly washed hair. Mrs. Holloway had lent Delilah one of her dresses, altered hastily to fit her taller frame. The simple blue calico complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion in a way that made Owen's heart beat a little faster. "That's Wyoming for you," he replied, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Beautiful and deadly in equal measure." Their eyes met briefly, and Owen felt something shift between them, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. But Delilah looked away quickly, focusing on Samuel, who was beginning to stir in his makeshift crib. "I should see about getting back to my place," she said, lifting her son into her arms. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "The snow's still 3 feet deep in places," Owen pointed out, "and your homestead is miles away. At least wait until I can clear a path for the sleigh." Delilah hesitated, clearly torn between her desire for independence and the practical reality of their situation. "One more day, then," she conceded. "But tomorrow I really must return. I have livestock to tend to." Owen didn't argue, though he doubted any animals left at the McKinnon place had survived the blizzard without care. Instead, he spent the day preparing for their journey, checking his sleigh runners, selecting his strongest pair of draft horses, and packing supplies that he suspected Delilah would need but be too proud to ask for. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Owen harnessed the horses to the sleigh while Mrs. Holloway fussed over Delilah and Samuel, ensuring they had enough blankets and hot bricks wrapped in flannel to keep them warm during the journey. "You'll come back and visit us, won't you, dear?" the housekeeper asked, her affection for Delilah evident in her concerned expression. "It's been so nice having a young woman around the place again." "Of course," Delilah promised, though Owen noted the hesitation in her voice. She was not a woman who made promises lightly. The journey to the McKinnon homestead took nearly 3 hours, the sleigh moving slowly through the deep snow. Samuel slept for most of the trip, bundled securely against his mother's chest. Delilah remained quiet, her expression growing more anxious as they approached her property. Owen understood her concern when the homestead came into view. The small cabin appeared intact, but the barn had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow. Of the 10 cattle that should have been in the corral, only 3 remained, huddled miserably in the corner least affected by the snowdrift. "Oh no," Delilah whispered, her face paling. "The barn." Owen helped her from the sleigh, then carried Samuel as Delilah rushed toward the collapsed structure. She stopped suddenly, her hand flying to her mouth. "The horses," she said, her voice breaking. "They're dead." Owen came to stand beside her, looking into the barn where 2 horses lay motionless beneath fallen beams. It was a devastating loss for a homesteader without horses. Delilah had no way to work the land or travel easily. "I'm sorry," he said simply, knowing no words could ease the blow this dealt to her already precarious situation. Delilah squared her shoulders, visibly gathering her composure. "At least the house is still standing. We should get Samuel inside." The interior of the cabin was bitterly cold, but structurally sound. Owen set to work immediately, building a fire in the stone hearth while Delilah settled Samuel in his proper crib. The baby fussed, unhappy with the chilly surroundings after the warmth of Owen's ranch house. "It will warm up soon," Delilah soothed, though Owen could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, sparsely furnished but meticulously clean. It spoke of Delilah's determination to create a home despite difficult circumstances. Once the fire was blazing, Owen brought in the supplies he'd packed: flour, coffee, sugar, salt pork, and dried beans. Delilah's eyes widened at the sight. "Mr. Flynn, Owen, I can't accept all this," she protested. "You've already done too much." "You can repay me when you sell the ranch," he replied pragmatically. "Consider it an advance." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't refuse the food either. They worked together to unload the rest of the supplies, and Owen took stock of the remaining livestock and the damage to the barn. The news wasn't good without significant repairs. The structure wouldn't last another storm, and Wyoming's winter had only just begun. As the afternoon waned, Owen knew he should start back before darkness fell, but he found himself reluctant to leave Delilah and Samuel alone in the isolated homestead. "I could stay," he offered as they stood in the doorway of the cabin. "Help with repairs tomorrow." Delilah shook her head, though he could see the conflicted emotions in her eyes. "You've done more than enough already. We'll be fine." "At least let me come back in a few days," Owen persisted. "Check on you both, bring more supplies." She hesitated, then nodded. "That would be kind, thank you." Owen returned to the McKinnon homestead 3 days later, bringing tools and lumber to repair the barn. He found Delilah outside, attempting to clear snow from around the structure, her face flushed with exertion. "You shouldn't be doing that alone," he chided gently, jumping down from his horse. "You could bring the rest of it down on yourself." "I can't just sit and wait for help that might never come," she replied, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I've learned that lesson well enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Owen made the journey to Delilah's homestead every few days. Together, they repaired the barn enough to shelter the remaining livestock, and Owen helped her bury the horses that had been lost. Samuel grew accustomed to Owen's presence, his small face lighting up whenever the rancher appeared. During these visits, Owen learned more about Delilah's life. She had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a school teacher who had moved west after her mother died. She had dreams of becoming a teacher herself someday, though circumstances had led her down a different path. "I still have my father's books," she told Owen one evening as they sat by her fire, Samuel asleep in his crib. "I read to Samuel every night, even though he's too young to understand. I want him to love learning as much as I do." Owen found himself sharing his own story in return, how his parents had come from Ireland during the potato famine, determined to build a new life in America. How his father had worked for 15 years as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own land. How Owen had taken over the ranch at 20 when both his parents died within months of each other, leaving him alone but determined to honor their legacy. "You've done well," Delilah observed. "Your parents would be proud." "I hope so," Owen replied softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing things right, making the decisions they would have made." "I understand that feeling," Delilah said, her gaze drifting to Samuel. "I wonder every day if I'm doing right by him, if the choices I'm making are the best ones." In these quiet conversations, something was growing between them, a connection deeper than friendship, but not yet acknowledged by either. Owen found himself thinking of Delilah during the days he spent at his own ranch, wondering how she and Samuel were faring, looking forward to his next visit with an eagerness that surprised him. January passed in this manner, with Owen dividing his time between his own ranch and helping Delilah maintain hers. He had made inquiries about potential buyers for her property, but as he spent more time with her, he found himself increasingly reluctant to see her leave. February arrived with another storm system, though less severe than the December blizzard. Still, Owen insisted that Delilah and Samuel stay at his ranch until it passed, an arrangement that was becoming comfortably familiar to all of them. It was during this stay that Owen realized the depth of his feelings for Delilah. He found her in his study one evening, reading one of his father's books on agriculture, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her lap. The sight of her there, so at home among his things, stirred something profound in his heart. "You look right sitting there," he said without thinking. Delilah looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Owen moved closer, suddenly certain of what he wanted to say. "I mean you belong here, Delilah. You and Samuel both." She closed the book slowly, her expression guarded. "Owen, I know it's soon," he continued, kneeling beside her chair. "I know you're still grieving Thomas, but I can't help how I feel. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you with Samuel. I've never met anyone like you." Delilah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I can't ask you to take on another man's wife, another man's child." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Owen replied, gently taking her hand. "And Samuel, I already think of him as part of my life. I want to watch him grow, help him become a man you can be proud of." A tear slipped down Delilah's cheek. "I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected." "You don't have to say anything now," Owen assured her. "Just know that when you're ready, I'll be here. Your ranch, your debts, none of that matters to me. What matters is you, Delilah, you and Samuel." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away either. They sat in companionable silence until Samuel stirred, demanding his mother's attention. The following week brought yet another storm to Wyoming, this one the fiercest of the winter. Owen had insisted that Delilah stay at his ranch again, but she had been equally insistent on returning to her homestead to check on her remaining livestock. "I'll only be gone a few hours," she had promised, bundling Samuel against her chest. "We'll be back before the worst hits." Owen had reluctantly agreed, but as the hours passed and the storm intensified, his worry grew. By mid-afternoon, with no sign of Delilah and snow falling so heavily that visibility was reduced to mere yards, he could wait no longer. "I'm going after them," he told Mrs. Holloway, pulling on his heavy coat and gathering supplies. "If we're not back by morning, send word to Sheriff Miller." The journey to the McKinnon homestead was treacherous, the trail almost completely obscured by fresh snow. Owen's horse struggled through drifts that reached above its knees, and the biting wind made it difficult to see or breathe. When he finally reached the cabin, his heart sank. The door stood open, snow blowing into the interior. Delilah's small sleigh was outside, but there was no sign of her or Samuel. "Delilah," he called, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Delilah, where are you?" Panic rising, Owen checked the cabin, finding it empty. The barn was next, but again, no sign of the young woman or her child. The remaining cattle huddled inside, along with Delilah's milk cow, which lowed mournfully at his approach. Where could they be? Owen fought against growing fear as he circled the property, calling Delilah's name. The storm was worsening by the minute, the temperature dropping dangerously. If they were out in this weather. A faint sound caught his attention, not Delilah's voice, but the unmistakable cry of a baby. Owen turned toward it, straining to locate its source. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the direction of the old oak tree that stood 50 yards from the cabin. Owen plunged through the deep snow, following the sound. As he neared the massive tree, he spotted what looked like a depression in the snow, not a natural drift, but something else. "Delilah!" he shouted, dropping to his knees and beginning to dig with his gloved hands. "Delilah, can you hear me?" There was no response, but the baby's cry came again, muffled but distinct. Owen dug frantically, throwing snow aside until his fingers touched fabric Delilah's coat. He redoubled his efforts, uncovering her still form beneath nearly 2 feet of snow. She was curled protectively around Samuel, her body creating a shelter that had saved the child from the worst of the cold. "Delilah," Owen said urgently, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was deathly pale, her lips blue with cold. For one terrible moment, he feared he was too late. But then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but barely. Samuel whimpered as Owen carefully extracted him from his mother's arms. The baby's face was red from cold and crying, but he seemed otherwise unharmed, protected by Delilah's body and multiple layers of blankets. "It's all right, little one," Owen soothed, tucking the child inside his coat against his chest. "I've got you. Now let's help your mama." He turned back to Delilah, continuing to clear the snow that half buried her. She showed no signs of consciousness, her breathing shallow and irregular. Owen needed to get her warm immediately, but he couldn't carry both her and Samuel through the deep snow to the cabin. Making a quick decision, Owen removed his outer coat, wrapped it around Delilah, and hoisted her into his arms. The bitter cold immediately penetrated his remaining layers, but he ignored the discomfort, focused solely on reaching the cabin. The journey back seemed interminable, each step a battle against the driving snow and the weight of Delilah's limp form. Samuel had fallen silent against Owen's chest, which worried him almost more than Delilah's unconscious state. "Stay with me," he murmured to both of them. "Just a little farther." When they finally reached the cabin, Owen kicked the door shut behind them and laid Delilah gently on the bed. The fire had died down to embers, and he quickly stoked it back to life, adding wood until flames leapt high in the hearth. Samuel was his first priority. He unwrapped the baby, checking him carefully for signs of frostbite. To his immense relief, the child seemed largely unharmed, though cold and hungry. Owen warmed a blanket by the fire and wrapped Samuel in it, placing him in his crib near the heat. Then he turned his attention to Delilah. Her condition was far more serious. Her skin remained frighteningly cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. Owen knew the dangers of severe cold all too well. He needed to warm her gradually to avoid shock to her system. He removed her snow-soaked clothing, replacing it with dry blankets warmed by the fire. Her hands and feet were concerning white in spots, suggesting frostbite. Owen filled a basin with lukewarm water and began the slow process of warming her extremities, starting with room-temperature water and gradually increasing the warmth. "Delilah," he called softly, rubbing her hands between his own. "Delilah, can you hear me? Samuel needs you. I need you." There was no response, but Owen continued his efforts, bathing her cold skin with warm cloths, speaking to her constantly, willing her back to consciousness. Samuel began to cry again, hungry and distressed by his mother's condition. "Cry again," Owen urged the baby, sudden inspiration striking him. "Let her hear you, Samuel. Let your mama hear you." He lifted the crying child and placed him near Delilah's head, allowing his distressed wails to fill the small cabin. "Cry again, Samuel. Let me hear you. Let your mama hear you." Whether it was the sound of her child's cries, the gradual warming of her body, or simply her own indomitable spirit, Delilah stirred at last. Her eyelids fluttered and a soft moan escaped her blue-tinged lips. "Samuel," she whispered, so faintly Owen barely caught it. "My baby." "He's right here," Owen assured her, relief flooding through him. "He's safe, Delilah. You kept him safe." Her eyes opened fully, confusion giving way to recognition as she focused on Owen's face. "The tree couldn't make it back to the cabin." Owen understood then what had happened. A branch, or perhaps the entire tree, had fallen in the high winds, blocking her path back to the cabin. She had sought shelter behind the massive trunk, but the blowing snow had gradually buried her as she huddled with Samuel. "You're both safe now," he promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I've got you." Over the next hours, Delilah's condition improved gradually. Color returned to her cheeks, and she was able to sit up enough to nurse Samuel, who had calmed considerably once reunited with his mother. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, warmth and hope prevailed. "You saved us," Delilah said later that night as Owen prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "Again." "I couldn't bear to lose you," he replied honestly, meeting her gaze across the small room. "Either of you." "Why did you come looking for us?" she asked, though he suspected she already knew the answer. "Because I love you," Owen said simply. "I think I have since that first day when I found you in the snow with Samuel. Your courage, your devotion to your son. Everything about you calls to something in me I didn't know was there." Tears filled Delilah's eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief or fear he had seen before. These were tears of something else, hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of joy. "I never expected to find love again," she said softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was focused only on survival, on keeping Samuel safe." "And now?" Owen asked, his heart in his throat. "Now I find myself thinking of a future that includes more than just survival," she admitted. "A future that includes you, if that's truly what you want." Owen crossed the small space and knelt beside the bed, taking her still cool hand in his warm one. "It's all I want. You, me, Samuel, a family. My ranch has never felt like a true home, not since my parents died, but with you there, it could be." "What about my place?" Delilah asked. "The debts?" "We'll figure it all out," Owen promised. "Your land joins with mine at the northern boundary together. They'll make one of the finest ranches in the territory. But even if they didn't, even if you owned nothing but the clothes on your back, I'd still want you, Delilah McKinnon." The storm lasted 3 more days, confining them to the small cabin. During that time, a different kind of bond formed between them, not the desperate connection of survivors, but something deeper and more enduring. Owen tended to Delilah's frostbitten fingers, relieved when feeling returned to all but the very tips. He cared for Samuel when Delilah needed rest, discovering a natural affinity for fatherhood that surprised and delighted him. When the weather finally cleared, they made their way back to Owen's ranch, where Mrs. Holloway welcomed them with open arms and knowing eyes. "About time," she muttered to Owen as Delilah settled Samuel in the nursery that had once been Owen's own. "I was beginning to think you'd never see what was right in front of you." Spring came early to Wyoming that year, the harsh winter giving way to a glorious April filled with wildflowers and new growth. On the first truly warm day, Owen and Delilah were married beneath the blossoming apple trees in his orchard, with Samuel cooing happily in Mrs. Holloway's arms. "I never thought I'd find love in a blizzard," Delilah said that night as they stood on the porch of their home now, truly watching the stars appear one by one in the clear Wyoming sky. "Sometimes the harshest storms bring the greatest blessings," Owen replied, drawing her close. "I thank God every day that I heard Samuel's cry through the snow." Delilah rested her head against his shoulder, her left hand in his, the slight numbness in her fingertips a permanent reminder of how close they had come to losing everything and how miraculous it was that they had instead found each other. "Cry again," she murmured, echoing the words Owen had spoken to Samuel during those desperate hours in the cabin. "Let me hear you." "Those words saved your life," Owen said softly. "I needed Samuel to make noise so I could find you both under the snow. I kept digging for hours, following his cries. And now here we are," Delilah said, turning to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Safe together with a whole future ahead of us." "A future that begins tonight," Owen agreed, bending to kiss his wife as the Wyoming wind, now gentle and warm, whispered promises of seasons to come.